In the world of elite military training, respect isn't given, it's earned through blood, sweat, and unbreakable determination. But what happens when a single moment of disrespect meets an unstoppable force of nature? When Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell stepped onto the training ground that scorching afternoon, nobody expected the quiet woman with calloused hands to rewrite the rules of engagement. One unexpected strike would shatter assumptions, silence doubters, and prove that true strength doesn't always come in the package you expect. This is the story of how one soldier's lightning-fast response turned a moment of humiliation into a legend that would echo through military halls for generations. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come not from textbooks or commanding officers, but from the split-second decisions that reveal who we really are when everything is on the line. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on Fort Henderson as Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell adjusted her combat boots one final time. The training facility buzzed with nervous energy as over 1,000 soldiers gathered in the amphitheater-style seating that surrounded the central combat ring. Today wasn't just another training exercise, it was the annual Advanced Combat Assessment, where the military's finest would demonstrate their skills before a panel of high-ranking officers and fellow servicemen. Sarah had been in the military for 8 years, working her way up through determination and an almost supernatural ability to anticipate her opponent's moves. At 5'6" with a lean build, she didn't look like the typical soldier who dominated these competitions. Her quiet demeanor and preference for listening over speaking had earned her respect among those who knew her well, but to many in the crowd, she was just another participant hoping to prove herself. The morning had started like any other. Sarah woke at 0500 hours, completed her standard physical training routine, and spent an hour reviewing combat techniques in the empty gymnasium. She preferred the solitude of early morning training, finding peace in the rhythmic sound of her fists hitting the heavy bag and the controlled breathing that accompanied her kata forms. Her instructor, Master Sergeant Rodriguez, had taught her that true martial arts wasn't about aggression. It was about precision, timing, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. As she walked toward the registration area, Sarah noticed the familiar faces of her unit mixed with soldiers from other bases who had come to participate or spectate. The competition drew military personnel from across 3 states, making it one of the most prestigious events of the year. Winners would earn recognition, potential promotions, and the respect that came with being considered among the elite. "Mitchell," called out Captain Thompson, her commanding officer. "Ready for today?" Sarah nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir. I've been preparing for months." "Good. Remember, this isn't just about individual performance. You're representing our unit out there. Make us proud." The weight of representation wasn't lost on Sarah. She knew that as one of only 37 women participating among nearly 200 competitors, her performance would be scrutinized differently. Some would be rooting for her to succeed, while others would be waiting for her to confirm their biases about women in combat roles. The first event was hand-to-hand combat demonstrations. Participants were randomly paired to showcase various techniques while being evaluated by a panel of expert judges. Sarah watched as the early pairs went through their routines, some impressive, others clearly nervous and making basic mistakes. The crowd's energy fluctuated with each performance, cheering for spectacular moves and falling silent during more technical displays. When her name was called, Sarah felt the familiar calm that always preceded her best performances. Her assigned partner was Sergeant Marcus Webb from Fort Collins, a stocky man with arms like tree trunks and a reputation for aggressive fighting techniques. As they bowed to each other in the center of the ring, Sarah could see the dismissive look in his eyes. He had clearly expected a more challenging opponent. The exercise began with basic defensive maneuvers. Sarah moved with fluid grace, deflecting Webb's strikes while maintaining perfect form. The judges nodded approvingly at her technique, but she could sense Webb's growing frustration with her defensive style. He had come here to showcase his power, not to engage in what he probably saw as a slow-paced technical demonstration. "Come on, Mitchell," Webb muttered during a brief pause. "Let's make this interesting." Without warning, he abandoned the choreographed routine they were supposed to be following and launched a genuine attack. A sharp right hook aimed directly at Sarah's jaw. It wasn't part of the demonstration. It was a real strike, thrown with full force and malicious intent. The crowd gasped as they realized what was happening. This wasn't training anymore. Time seemed to slow as Sarah processed the incoming threat. Years of training kicked in automatically. Her body moved before her conscious mind had fully registered the situation. Webb's punch was fast and powerful, but it was also telegraphed and driven by anger rather than technique. Sarah shifted her weight slightly, allowing the punch to barely graze past her cheek while simultaneously positioning herself for a counterattack. What happened next would be replayed in slow motion for years to come. As Webb's momentum carried him forward from his missed punch, Sarah's right hand shot upward in a perfect palm strike that connected with Webb's solar plexus. The impact was precise and devastating, hitting the exact nerve cluster that Master Sergeant Rodriguez had taught her to target. Webb's eyes went wide with shock and pain as all the air left his lungs in a rush, but Sarah wasn't finished. In the same fluid motion, her left hand grabbed Webb's extended right arm, and she used his forward momentum to execute a flawless hip throw that sent the 200-pound sergeant flying through the air. He landed hard on his back with a thunderous impact that echoed throughout the amphitheater. The silence that followed was deafening. Over 1,000 soldiers sat in stunned silence trying to process what they had just witnessed. Webb lay on his back, gasping for air and staring at the sky, completely unable to move. Sarah stood calmly beside him, her uniform barely wrinkled, breathing normally as if nothing unusual had happened. The judges scrambled to their feet, unsure how to respond to this deviation from protocol. Several medical personnel rushed toward the ring, but Sarah held up her hand to stop them. She knelt beside Webb, who was still struggling to catch his breath, and checked his pulse and pupil response with the practiced efficiency of someone trained in combat first aid. "He's okay," she announced to the crowd. "Just had the wind knocked out of him. Give him a minute." As if to prove her assessment correct, Webb slowly began to breathe normally again. With Sarah's help, he managed to sit up, though he still looked dazed and confused. The crowd remained silent, waiting to see how this unprecedented situation would be resolved. Colonel Anderson, the highest-ranking officer present, made his way to the ring. His weathered face showed a mixture of concern and curiosity as he approached Sarah and the still-recovering Webb. The entire amphitheater held its breath, waiting for his judgment. "Sergeant Webb," the colonel said in his commanding voice, "what exactly happened here?" Webb struggled to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and the lingering effects of Sarah's strike. I threw a real punch, sir. Lost my temper during the demonstration." "And Lieutenant Mitchell?" Sarah stood at attention. "I defended myself using appropriate force, sir. Sergeant Webb threw an unprovoked attack outside the parameters of the exercise. I neutralized the threat." Colonel Anderson studied both soldiers carefully. In his 30 years of military service, he had seen countless training incidents, but never anything quite like this. A smaller opponent had not only defended against a surprise attack from a much larger aggressor, but had done so with such precision and control that the attacker was incapacitated without serious injury. "The exercise will continue," he announced to the crowd. "Sergeant Webb, report to the medical station for evaluation, then to my office. Lieutenant Mitchell, outstanding display of defensive techniques. Resume your position." As Webb limped away, assisted by medical personnel, Sarah remained in the center of the ring. But something had changed. The energy of the crowd was completely different now. Where there had been casual interest before, there was now intense focus. Every eye was on her, and she could feel the shift in how she was being perceived. Her next partner, Lieutenant Torres from Fort Stewart, approached with obvious respect and perhaps a touch of nervousness. "That was incredible," he whispered as they bowed to each other. "I've never seen anything like that." The remainder of her demonstration went flawlessly. Torres, now fully aware of Sarah's capabilities, performed his techniques with extra precision and respect. The judges scored their routine as one of the highest of the day, but Sarah knew that scores were no longer what mattered. Something much more significant had occurred. As she walked off the mat, Sarah was surrounded by fellow soldiers offering congratulations and asking questions about her technique. Many wanted to know where she had learned to fight like that, who her instructors were, and whether she taught classes herself. The attention was overwhelming for someone who preferred to stay in the background. "Sarah," called out Master Sergeant Rodriguez, pushing through the crowd. His weathered face beamed with pride as he reached her. "That was textbook perfect. Every technique exactly as we practiced, even under pressure. Thank you, Sergeant. Your training saved me out there." "No," he said, shaking his head. "Training gave you tools. What you did out there, the split-second decision-making, the precise application of force, the control to stop exactly when the threat was neutralized, that came from inside you. That's the mark of a true martial artist." As the crowd began to disperse for the next event, Sarah found a quiet corner to collect her thoughts. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off, and she was starting to process what had really happened. In the span of 3 seconds, she had gone from being just another participant to being the center of attention for over 1,000 military personnel. But more importantly, she had proven something to herself. All those early morning training sessions, all the hours spent perfecting techniques that others might have seen as unnecessary for someone her size, had culminated in this moment. When faced with a genuine threat, her body and mind had responded perfectly, protecting her while neutralizing the aggressor without causing permanent harm. The rest of the day's event seemed to pass in a blur. Sarah participated in the remaining competitions, weapons training, obstacle courses, and tactical scenarios, performing well in each. But she could sense that everyone was still thinking about that moment in the ring. Conversations stopped when she walked by, not out of disrespect, but because people were genuinely curious about the quiet woman who had just redefined their understanding of combat effectiveness. As evening approached and the competition wound down, Sarah prepared for what she expected would be a difficult conversation with Colonel Anderson. Being called to the commander's office was never routine, especially after an incident like today's. She had acted in self-defense, but military regulations were complex, and unauthorized violence during training exercises could have serious consequences regardless of justification. The walk to the administration building felt longer than usual. The setting sun cast long shadows across the base, and the temperature was finally beginning to drop after the scorching heat of the day. Other soldiers she passed offered nods of respect or quiet words of encouragement, but Sarah's mind was focused on the upcoming meeting. Colonel Anderson's office was exactly what one would expect from a career military officer. Sparse, organized, with commendations and photographs covering the walls. The colonel sat behind his desk, reviewing a folder that Sarah assumed contained reports from the day's incidents. When she knocked and was invited in, he looked up with an expression that was difficult to read. "Lieutenant Mitchell, please have a seat." Sarah sat at attention, waiting for whatever consequences would follow her actions. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes before Colonel Anderson finally spoke. "In 30 years of military service, I've seen a lot of training incidents. Most of them involve soldiers letting their egos override their judgment, resulting in injuries and damaged careers. What happened today was different." He leaned forward, studying her carefully. "Tell me about your martial arts background." Sarah provided a concise summary of her training. 8 years of various disciplines, countless hours of practice, emphasis on defensive techniques and controlled aggression. She mentioned Master Sergeant Rodriguez's influence and her philosophy of using force only when absolutely necessary. "And in those years of training, have you ever had to use your skills in a real situation like today?" "A few times, sir. Twice to defend myself off base from attempted assaults, once to help subdue an intoxicated soldier who was threatening other personnel, but never during an official training exercise." Colonel Anderson nodded thoughtfully. "Your response today demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment and skill we hope to develop in all our personnel. You accurately assessed a threat, responded with appropriate force, and immediately provided aid once the threat was neutralized. That's textbook military doctrine executed perfectly under pressure." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Thank you, sir. However," he continued, "this incident has raised some interesting questions. Your capabilities clearly exceed what most people would expect based on your physical appearance and quiet demeanor. That kind of surprise advantage could be tactically valuable in the right circumstances." The conversation that followed would set Sarah on a path she had never imagined. Colonel Anderson explained that military intelligence had been developing specialized training programs for personnel who could operate effectively in situations where traditional soldiers might be too conspicuous or intimidating. Sarah's combination of advanced combat skills and unassuming appearance made her an ideal candidate for such programs. "I'm not ordering you to consider this," he said carefully, "but there are opportunities for soldiers with your unique qualifications, programs that would challenge you in ways regular military service cannot. Think about it." As Sarah left the colonel's office, her mind raced with possibilities she had never considered. The day that had started as a routine training competition had evolved into something that might change the entire trajectory of her military career. But first, she had to get through whatever consequences awaited in the days ahead. Walking back to her barracks through the quiet evening air, Sarah reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. That morning, she had been focused on performing well in a competition. Now she was potentially being recruited for programs she wasn't even sure she understood, all because she had defended herself against an unprovoked attack. The barracks buzzed with conversation when she entered. News of the day's events had spread throughout the base, growing and changing with each retelling. Some versions had her defeating multiple attackers, others described fighting techniques that defied physics. Sarah smiled to herself, recognizing how military legends were born from kernels of truth, wrapped in layers of embellishment. Her bunkmate, Specialist Jennifer Park, was waiting with barely contained curiosity. "Is it true you knocked out Marcus Webb with one hit?" "He's not knocked out," Sarah replied, hanging up her uniform. "Just temporarily incapacitated. And it was actually a combination of techniques, not one hit. Everyone's saying you're some kind of secret martial arts master. Is that true?" Sarah considered how to answer. She had never thought of herself as a master of anything, just someone who took training seriously and tried to improve every day. But she was beginning to understand that perception could be as important as reality in the military environment. "I've had good training and good instructors," she said finally. "Today I was lucky enough to be prepared when I needed to be." As she settled in for the night, Sarah's thoughts turned to the 1,000 soldiers who had witnessed her encounter with Webb. Each of them would carry their own version of the story back to their units, their friends, their families. Some would focus on the technical aspects of the fight, others on the David and Goliath nature of the matchup. But all of them had seen something that challenged their preconceptions about strength, skill, and what it meant to be a warrior. The quiet woman who preferred early morning training sessions and technical precision over flashy demonstrations had, in 3 seconds, become a symbol of something larger than herself. And this was only the beginning. The weeks following the incident at Fort Henderson brought changes Sarah Mitchell had never anticipated. What started as a defensive reaction during a training exercise had somehow evolved into something much larger. Military personnel from across the country had heard various versions of the story, and with each retelling, the legend grew more elaborate. Sarah tried to maintain her normal routine, but normal no longer existed. During morning physical training, other soldiers would pause their exercises to watch her work out. In the mess hall, conversations would quiet when she entered, not from hostility, but from genuine curiosity about the woman who had become an overnight sensation in military circles. The official investigation into the Webb incident concluded quickly. Video footage from multiple angles confirmed Sarah's account completely. She had been attacked without provocation and had responded with precisely the minimum force necessary to neutralize the threat. Webb received a formal reprimand and mandatory anger management counseling, while Sarah was commended for her restraint and tactical awareness under pressure. But the unofficial consequences were far more complex. Sarah found herself receiving invitations to demonstrate techniques at other bases, requests for interviews from military publications, and most significantly, visits from personnel she had never seen before who asked very specific questions about her training and capabilities. 3 weeks after the incident, Master Sergeant Rodriguez found her in the gymnasium during her usual early morning session. His expression was serious, and she could tell he had something important to discuss. "Sarah, I need to talk to you about some opportunities that have come up." They sat on the bench beside the heavy bags where Sarah had spent countless hours perfecting her technique. Rodriguez had been more than an instructor. He had been a mentor who understood that martial arts was as much about mental discipline as physical prowess. "You know that what happened at the competition has attracted attention from some very high-level people," he began. "The kind of people who recruit for programs that most soldiers never hear about." Sarah had suspected this was coming. The questions from mysterious visitors, the subtle changes in how she was being treated by commanding officers, the requests for detailed background checks that went far beyond standard military requirements, all pointed towards something beyond regular military service. "Special forces?" she asked. Rodriguez shook his head. "Different. More specialized. The people I've talked to are interested in soldiers who can operate in situations where traditional military approaches won't work. Situations that require someone who can blend in, assess threats quickly, and handle problems with minimal violence and maximum precision." The conversation that followed opened Sarah's eyes to a world within the military that she had never imagined. There were units that worked in civilian environments, protecting high-value targets who couldn't have obvious security details. There were intelligence operations that required personnel who could defend themselves if compromised but wouldn't attract attention in normal social situations. There were diplomatic missions to unstable regions where traditional military presence would be inappropriate, but where threats to American personnel were very real. "They're not asking you to become a killer," Rodriguez explained carefully. "They're asking you to become something more subtle and perhaps more valuable, a protector who can hide in plain sight." The recruitment process began gradually. Sarah continued her regular duties while participating in additional training sessions that were officially described as advanced tactical development. These sessions took place in nondescript buildings away from the main base facilities and were conducted by instructors who never provided their real names or full military credentials. The training was unlike anything Sarah had experienced in 8 years of military service. Instead of focusing on overwhelming force or military-style coordination, these sessions emphasized individual assessment and response. She learned to identify threats in civilian environments, to neutralize attackers without causing lasting damage, and to extract herself from dangerous situations without attracting unwanted attention. One particularly challenging exercise involved attending a mock social function where she had to identify which of the 50 attendees posed genuine threats while maintaining normal social interactions. Hidden among the actors playing ordinary partygoers were individuals with weapons, others with communications equipment suggesting hostile intelligence gathering, and some who displayed behavioral patterns indicating potential violence. Sarah's performance in these exercises consistently impressed her unnamed instructors. Her natural tendency toward quiet observation, combined with her combat skills and ability to remain calm under pressure, made her exceptionally suited for this type of work. But more importantly, she was beginning to understand why she had been selected. The incident with Webb had demonstrated something that couldn't be taught or faked: the split-second judgment to use exactly the right amount of force in a genuinely threatening situation. Many soldiers could follow rules of engagement when they had time to think, but far fewer could make perfect tactical decisions when surprised and under immediate physical threat. Meanwhile, the legend of that moment continued to grow throughout military communities. Sarah began receiving letters from other female service members who had heard the story and wanted to know about her training methods. Some male soldiers wrote asking for advice about dealing with larger opponents. Parents of military personnel reached out, saying their sons or daughters had been inspired by her example. Most surprising were the letters from civilians who had somehow heard versions of the story. Women who worked in corporate environments where they felt physically intimidated wrote asking for self-defense advice. College students facing harassment wanted to know how to protect themselves without escalating situations unnecessarily. Even law enforcement officers reached out, curious about techniques for subduing suspects without causing injury. Sarah realized that her 3-second response to Webb's attack had somehow become a symbol for something much larger than military training. She represented the possibility that physical size and aggressive posturing weren't the only forms of strength, and that true power might come from preparation, technique, and the wisdom to use force only when necessary. The attention was overwhelming for someone who had always preferred working behind the scenes. Sarah found herself struggling to balance her desire for privacy with the growing recognition that her story might genuinely help others. She began spending her off-duty hours responding to letters and emails, offering what advice she could while being careful not to reveal details about her ongoing specialized training. 6 weeks after the Webb incident, Colonel Anderson called Sarah to his office again. This time, the meeting included 2 individuals she had never seen before: a woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself only as Agent Parker, and a man in military dress uniform with insignia Sarah didn't recognize. "Lieutenant Mitchell," Colonel Anderson began, "your performance in recent evaluations has been exceptional. These individuals are here to discuss opportunities that would allow you to use your unique skills in ways that could serve important national interests." Agent Parker took over the conversation. "We've been following your development with great interest. The incident that brought you to our attention demonstrated judgment and capability that are extremely rare. We'd like to offer you the chance to join a program where those abilities could make a real difference." The program, as it was explained to Sarah, involved embedding trained personnel in civilian environments where traditional security approaches would be ineffective or inappropriate. American diplomats, business people, and researchers working in unstable regions needed protection, but obvious military security details could actually increase danger by confirming the importance of the people being protected. Sarah would be trained to work as everything from a personal assistant to a tour guide, maintaining cover identities that would allow her to stay close to protected individuals without attracting hostile attention. If threats materialized, her job would be to neutralize them quickly and quietly, then extract her principals to safety without creating international incidents or exposing ongoing intelligence operations. "This isn't about eliminating enemies," Agent Parker emphasized. "This is about preventing situations from escalating to the point where elimination becomes necessary. Your demonstrated ability to use minimal force while maintaining complete control is exactly what we need." The decision wasn't easy. Accepting would mean leaving regular military service for something that couldn't be discussed with friends or family. It would mean years of additional training, assignments in potentially dangerous locations, and a level of secrecy that would isolate her from the normal support systems of military life. But Sarah also understood that this was exactly the kind of work she was uniquely suited to perform. Her years of martial arts training had always emphasized the principle that true strength came from avoiding conflict whenever possible and resolving it quickly and decisively when avoidance wasn't an option. This program would allow her to apply those principles in situations where they could genuinely save lives. "I'd like to accept," she said finally. The transition process began immediately.